Okay, so the Royals not totally pathetic.
Oh, boy.
After they finish a 4-game series with the Yankees, they walk it off today, 3-2 the victory for Kansas City. Michael Garcia with the game-winning hit. Had to score 2 in the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs. They were down to the last strike and got it done. Who in the bullpen? Who was it that gave it up? Who gave up the lead?
Schreiber, and then MacArthur got the win, but beat a pretty good pitcher in Clay Holmes, who only had blown 3 saves coming into that game. But yeah, big win for KC as they head out west now for 9 games. Dodgers, A's, and Rangers. Well, that's not really out west, but, you get my point.
Welcome to the game. Thank you for your point, AJ. Mitch Fortner, Troy Coverdale, AJ Shaw with you. We're with you for a full 2 hours, and it'll be a busy show. Coming up in hour number 2, we'll be joined all hour by Tyler Dreiling, a former host of this show and now manager at a Booth Creek Wagyu, to come talk to us about Wildcat Wagyu Tailgate, which, if you haven't heard yet, big celebration at Booth Creek Wagyu on Saturday. There's going to be a whole bunch of K-State student athletes out there.
I started to see the listing for that the other day as he was sharing it on the artist formerly known as Twitter, and I was like, this looks interesting.
It looks like a lot of fun.
Exactly.
So he'll come in and talk to us, and he'll join us as well to talk about a number of topics which you can imagine have been follow along the headlines today. You know what those topics are. Brett Yormark, it sounds like back in May, was giving a whole lot of people the whole, well, you could stick your head up a bull's ass to get a look at a T-bone, but, that whole
okay.
shtick,
All right.
I think I just butchered that.
Yep.
From Tommy Boy. But, no, Brett Yormark, commissioner of the Big 12, is looking to get the Big 12 more money. And I see it as a pretty necessary step. It's not fun. It's already the direction college athletics is moving towards. Brett Yormark in the Big 12 is just going to be the first. So let's get into the details because there's a lot to unwrap. And by the way, I have a financial advisor coming on at 4:30 to help us talk about this. Mark Ewing from Edward Jones will be joining us at about 4:30 to help us kind of guide through some of the big words that might be mentioned during these 2 hours. I'm not a financial expert or an advisor, neither is Troy. He knows some stuff about this, though. I definitely know you have an opinion or two. I know we could probably call AJ's parents and figure out what the Big 12 should do with how to get more money. Maybe they need a couple more attorneys or something like that. Just staring at me while he's working. I don't know.
He's trying to figure out where you were going with that.
All right, so there's 2 things happening here. The first report I first saw from Dennis Dodd of CBSSports.com, and that the opening line pretty much says it just about. The Big 12 members are considering a first-of-its-kind private equity investment to ensure the league's long-term financial and competitive security. In the article, it says what's on the table is a possible cash infusion of $800 million to $1 billion from a Luxembourg-based CVC capital partner in exchange for 15 to 20% stake in the league. I mean, that tells you right there, gosh, the Big 12 is worth $5 billion? Okay. I mean, what's the SEC and Big 10 worth? $5 billion, though, that's not a small chunk of change for a conference. So there's one part of this story, and there's more to it. We're gonna break it down, of course. The other part of this story, and again, this goes back to the Big 12 meetings back in May, where all of this was discussed according to those reports. The other part of this story is at those Big 12 at the meetings with the administrators in Dallas. They talked about selling the conference naming rights, which honestly, that kind of caught my attention more than the whole, giving up 20% of the Big 12 in this whatever investment thing that I don't really understand. But the Big 12 naming rights, I mean, you're talking about changing the name of the conference. You're talking about throwing a business's name, a corporation's name into the conference, and the wheels start turning, and you're like, God, what would sound good? What would sound the best? What would not sound good at all? And what I think does not sound good at all is the All-State Conference or the Big All-State. I think both of those names sound stupid. Doesn't seem Power 4 to me. Not a big fan of it at all. All right, Troy, I got to ask you the big question. These moves that Brett Yormark is potentially making, I mean, are we in good hands?
I am well played.
Okay, I was hoping somebody. I was hoping you would catch that.
Well played. I am not so. I am exceptionally sensitive to the cash infusion from equity, venture equity, just venture capital, folks. I wince for various reasons that I'll touch on in a moment. The naming one does not hurt me so much.
I just don't want it to be a goofy sounding name, you know? Like I have ideas.
I get. I'm not so horrendous on Allstate given their sponsorship of college football over the years.
Yeah, they've invested a lot of money in
exactly.
the nets and stuff, the field goal nets. They've done a lot of stuff.
You know, that to me makes more sense than some of the other ones that have been floated out there.
I'm sure Allstate understands more than anybody what an investment in college football can do for your business.
Correct.
What's the return on investment? They've been doing it for a long time.
Right. And so, again, I think the naming aspect is not all that horrendous. The venture capital, I wince at that because there are so many things that are currently involved in other areas of our world at this point where venture capital has proven to be to a detriment. Many of them happen to be in the media world. And when I hear venture capital getting involved, I immediately wince because to me that tells me, oh, so it's going to be about cutting jobs this and cutting corners here and doing everything possible to ensure that the stockholders have their money. That's where I wince. It to me takes power away from the universities, and I have a problem with that.
Yeah, they're going to want a return on their investment. They're going to want to say, and I think I'm sure this has been reported. I didn't read all of Dennis Dodd. I was kind of bouncing around to different articles because there's just a few pieces of information I was trying to find. I would assume there would be probably a long-term type of commitment in place because there's another media rights deal coming up in 2031, and the negotiations will be before that.
And Dodds was pointing out, in fact, that the investment would likely require the structure as is to remain together long term for that reason, especially given that there's that new grant of rights in 2031.
I'll just lay out my feelings about all this, because I think it's pretty simple on what Brett Yormark is trying to do. And I understand it. And I've been pretty open about how much I hate the direction of college athletics because of how much power ESPN and Fox and CBS and NBC all have. The conference realignment is the most irritating part of this because I think we had it right. And now it's just a complete mess where you're having less conferences, larger conferences, because you got to try to make more money than the other conference. And you want to be a part of a conference that's making a ton of cash. It's about money. It's much less about the play on the field. And it's about brands. Maybe not so much about brand. Or I shouldn't say that. It's not so much about location anymore. It's about brands. Markets anymore. Not so much about that. It's about brands. Making money off of these brands. The Big 12 is making significantly less money than the Big 12 or the Big 10 and the SEC. This has been months in the making, I'm sure, but this is a as soon as possible jump in revenue. You got to compete. You can't stay that far behind the Big Ten and SEC and still plan on getting the best athletes in the country competing in NIL. And by the way, don't forget the House versus NCAA, where these universities are going to have $22 million per year to give themselves from the university to split, however, that's still got to be determined, among student athletes. Well, that is already something that the Big Ten and SEC have a big lead on, and they're going to have a better opportunity to fill that cap, that $22 million. The Big 12 has to match it to compete.
CVC already has shares of the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association. They own, in part, a cricket franchise in the Indian Premier League. They own La Liga, the Spain-based soccer giant league. They own a governing body that runs the soccer leagues in France, Ligue de Football Professionnel.
Look at this guy.
They are in charge of Premiership Rugby, England's top league, and Six Nations, which is the top league for Ireland, Scotland, and Wales.
I wish we got more accent, but I like it. Go ahead.
So, this at least points up that they have a sports interest already built up that is pretty strong. I mean, La Liga, beyond Premier League, La Liga is huge overseas as essentially number one or number two.
And when you throw out Luxembourg, do you know why I like Luxembourg being part of the equation?
Okay.
Luxembourg is like the richest country in the world.
Yeah.
When it comes to per capita investing, these kind of businesses, they're the most lucrative.
And to be perfectly honest, yes, I get the run. I get this, and I look at this, and I wince, and I don't like it. But it's not as if we didn't know it was already starting to be talked about. Maybe not so much in the way that it would be a direct effect on the conference that our teams call home, but it was already, starting to be discussed at various levels. Florida State being really the first to admit that they were having discussions regarding private equity helping them in their fight against the ACC going forward. So, it's not as if that this is a new thing. It's just the first time that we've heard it be mentioned with the Big 12. But it makes me fearful for the control that schools would have in that situation.
Back to the naming rights thing for the Big 12 Conference. Have you ever heard of a conference giving up its naming rights? I'm not talking, obviously, college athletics, but like anywhere. Maybe in Europe, maybe that has happened, but I'm not exactly sure. League names, I don't think that typically happens. But
you had NASCAR for years. While it's
like the Xfinity Series,
the Xfinity Series, long before any of that, it was the Winston Cup.
No, yeah, that's right. Yep.
Until the Department of Justice made them scuttle that because of smoking, because of the nicotine and all of that, and at that point it became the Nextel Cup and then the Sprint Cup, and they've not had a title sponsor for that top tier race for a while now. But yeah, the Xfinity, the Truck Series is the Camping World Truck Series. I mean, that's been their game. But you also kind of expect it from a sport where literally every inch on a car is sponsored. It feels like.
And if you're like me and you're freaking out over if it is going to be All-State and we're being stuck with saying the big All-State Conference or the All-State 12 or whatever it is, if it's the big All-State Conference, all we're going to just initialize and it's forever going to be the BAC.
The blood alcohol content. Good to know.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Hey, welcome to the Big 12. Let's test that BAC.
Yeah, let's test that BAC. Hey, Mayhem, get over here.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah, right?
It goes all hand in hand. It really is.
Yeah.
It feels like it's meant to be, really. Have to come up with some funny
Oh, boy.
outside of Allstate. I mean, I'll give you like kind of a serious one because I know on social media there's been some funny ones out there. I'm not totally stealing them and bring them up. I want to give those people credit because it's funny. Some of them I was reading, but I was like, you know what? The only company to me that makes sense to be like the name sponsor for the Big 12, Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper has been the sponsor for the Big 12 championship game for I think every one. Ever since it returned, I think in 2018. And then from 96 to 2010, it's always been Dr. Pepper. What's the game been called? The Dr. Pepper Big 12 Championship Game. So we just call it the Dr. Pepper Big 12.
Right, and it makes perfect sense. I have chuckled at the number of mentions of Buc-ee's that have turned up on the Twitter accounts today.
Buc-ee's 12.
Yeah, something along those
lines.
lines.
The Big Buc-ee's.
The Big Buc-ee's, yeah.
It's got the alliteration, you know.
Here's the one, though, that, well, might fly under everybody's radar, but I only bring it up because Dennis Dodge brought it up in the list of things that that this CVC group has a stake in the United States. Petco.
Yeah.
I know. I'm just saying.
Nah.
Nice ballpark they got, though, Petco Park.
Yeah. Little brother went last year, got to see a game down there.
Yeah.
I have to try to come up with
My cousin actually works there.
Oh, okay.
at Petco Park.
Yeah, he does.
What does he do?
He's like an usher.
Like an usher?
I was almost a usher at Madison Square Garden.
You were living in New York?
Yep. Interviewed and everything and didn't get the job. I am not bilingual. That set me back a ways. Let's take a break. When we come back, we need somebody a little bit smarter to talk to us about private equity, investments, CVC, overseas, these landlocked countries wanting to get involved with college football. We'll talk with Mark Ewing. He's a Edward Jones financial advisor. Big 12 making the right moves. We'll discuss with Mark when we come back.
You're listening to The Game on News Radio KMAN.
Very interesting day today as we return to the game. Mitch Fortner, Trey Coverdale, and A.J. Shaw. Big 12 considering a first-of-a-kind private equity investment to ensure the league's long-term financial and competitive security. This could be worth a lot of money. Possible cash infusion up to $1 billion. And also potentially selling the naming rights to the Big 12. That could also be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It gives the Big 12 a much better opportunity to compete with the Big 10 and SEC. I am not a financial expert, but I know somebody who is. He's a former Kansas Jayhawk. If you watched WIBW back in the day, you maybe saw him on WIBW talking some sports. And now he's a financial advisor with Edward Jones. We welcome Mark Ewing to the show. Mark, really appreciate your time. How long have you been now a financial advisor with Edward Jones?
In September, it'll be 7 years. So how about that? So Mitch and Troy and AJ, glad to be on the show. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it greatly having you on here and to talk about these big words that have to do with financial stuff. When I say the words that I just mentioned, private equity investment, what does that mean?
Well, what it is a private equity firm, they take, just like you would think, they take investors' money and they invest it in what they collectively decide to do. It's a little bit different from a brokerage firm in that we deal with private individuals. Sometimes those private equity companies will deal with companies, and they'll take their assets and buy a share of something. I would tell you it's not always a positive investment. There's certainly plenty of stories out there about it being a failure. But I'm not surprised they're going in this direction, especially the way things are going with NIL and everything else. It did. And I read the story that you forwarded me. It didn't surprise me a bit. I thought it's probably a natural first step. But you know what? I think it's important to point out that naming rights are a little bit different than than what they're talking with in regard to CVC. So naming rights is, hey, you pay X amount of dollars, and I'm going to put a logo on something of your choosing. And having been involved in that in my previous job, you may remember when I worked for the cable company, there are many layers to that onion. I mean, very expensive, lots of stuff going on in regard to what you're doing. This would be actually, as I interpret it, and again, I know they're very early, how I interpret it is they're buying a portion of the league, meaning they're buying a portion of the league revenues, and then they're going to invest it however they choose and try to make a profit on whatever revenues that they. So it is really revolutionary. But it's been done, but mostly with professional teams. There's an organization or a private equity firm called 6th Street that owns a bunch of things, mostly soccer teams, but all professional teams. I don't think there's an amateur entity at all. So either give Yormac credit for trying to find another revenue stream, or continue the criticism of, hey, how much is too much? I mean, where do we go with this?
Well, and it really is going to be one of those first steps because, as we mentioned, 6th Street has also been involved some in the discussions with Florida State over them getting out of the ACC. They want to be involved in some of that and have even floated the idea of some investment there to help them get out of the ACC. So I can't say I'm surprised there. But the question that stands out for me, Mark, is when this happens, how does control get structured?
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, there is no control. So, and that's the whole point, Troy. This is from a former Division I athlete and me looking at things the way they used to be. And this change has come really, really quickly, by the way. It's been years and decades. I was on full scholarship at Kansas, and I had to struggle to get, you obviously couldn't hold a job and go to school and have all the practice time and all that. So I would struggle to find quarters to, do my laundry. And now I just saw on Facebook, K-State's new quarterback just drove off the lot with a new car. It's a brand new ball game. And the NCAA, the people that I know at the NCAA have always told me, and they come up again and again and again, the whole idea behind the NCAA is to create a level playing field so everybody is on the same level when they compete. And what this does, NIL and maybe really and other things, it makes it uneven. It's really difficult to say, hey, where's this going to go? Are champions always going to come from the schools that have the most money based on whatever revenues that they're able to produce? And if that's the case, then it is an open market. Yormac has every right to go out and try to find whatever revenue he can if that's the case. I just think that eventually somebody's got to step up and say, hey, we gotta really get a handle on what exactly we're doing and what's our purpose is in regard to sports and the collegiate education part of this. What are we doing? I just think that's got to happen, don't you think?
You would hope so, but then again, the NCAA hasn't been all that great about control here in the last how many years? They haven't had many legs to stand on.
Well, it all, we all, I think it was Ed O'Bannon, UCLA, basketball player, is playing EA Sports. He's playing like his Xbox or whatever. And all of a sudden he looks at the screen and he says, hey, I'm playing UCLA and that guy looks just like me. And I'm not getting paid anything for this. So he sues the NCAA and he wins. He wins the case. And so I really think that the NCAA is really, really gun shy about getting sued because they obviously could get sued for billions and billions of dollars. So they're just stepping away saying, hey, we live in a capitalist system. Let's just let the market do its thing. We're going to win, we're going to lose, but the schools and the system are going to determine it rather than the NCAA. So that's where we are right now. There's a reason why we are where we are, and it's really, really interesting in regard to finance and how that's going to affect. But I would tell you, and again, I want to emphasize the point. This is again the first reading of this. Is that if you get a private equity firm involved on an amateur level, the investors, that company is going to expect a profit. So if they're buying 20% of the league, for example, they are buying a portion of whatever revenues are made, and if they don't make their revenues that they expect, who's that going to fall on? It's going to fall on fans to pay higher ticket prices, likely. I mean, where else would it come from? I mean, that's what they're up against. I don't think it's a great idea, and I also think about. I mean, when I played at Kansas, because again, I'm using examples of things that I'm familiar with. When I was at Kansas, 20 years ago, I was involved in a board that was considering just the idea of having advertising inside Allen Fieldhouse. And there was a big push against people like putting even signs up above doorways, like lit signs that said Pizza Hut or whatever the sponsor was, and that certainly has given way because they've really had no choice. So this has just evolved from that. And then when I worked with my previous company, I worked on, I wasn't the lead on it, but I worked on committees that were involved in advertising for Wichita State, K-State, and KU. And I can just tell you, so you got you got marketing people, and they're really, really smart, and that's what they do all day long. And they'll always tell me, they'll point out data, they'll give me sheets, and they'll say, there's no way that I can justify the amount of eyeballs that are going to see this product based on how much I'm paying, right? Because there's a dollar amount per viewing or per viewer or per click or whatever they've got. And it's always never equaled out. So I'm going to have a hard time believing that they can, with this being extended, it's so fractionalized between all the leagues, all the television rights. I just wonder if they've got enough people to justify the revenue that they're trying to produce. I don't know. I'd love to be a fly on the wall and learn what they're figuring out. But so far so good. I guess it's worked out for everybody. But we're very early on in the NIL experience, and if this takes it to a new level, I got to think, man. I'm just shaking my head saying, is this professional now? And what's the next thing? Are we doing unions? Are we having 401ks for our individual athletes? Where is this going? Where does it stop?
We're speaking with Edward Jones, financial advisor from here in Manhattan. Mark Ewing here on the game. So you mentioned you don't think this is a good idea to be involved with a private equity investment, this group out of Luxembourg there in Europe. You mentioned, they're not going to be happy if they're not seeing that return on investment. They're not making a profit. Would you have an idea? You may not know the answer to this, but would you have an idea of the timetable on when they need to see those numbers or how long they would give the Big 12 to show the profit? Is it a short amount of time? Are they comfortable with stretching it out 5 years?
Well, if it's like an investment, again, I'm just comparing it to what a standard advice for an investor would be. They'd say, hey, give it 3 years. And the reason is because generally a business cycle goes through 5 different stages, and it takes about 3 years to get through. And so I don't know if they're expecting immediate return or not. They'd have to certainly weather it. But I could see them getting in and then getting out very quickly if that happened to be the case. There's several examples where private equities get involved in companies and it doesn't work out. I mean, it's all over the place. But my feeling is, and again, I've probably read as much as you have, I have a feeling that Yormac, the Big 12 commissioners, somehow involved in the CVC. I got to think a company overseas, Luxembourg. I just think that I don't think they just picked that out of the blue. I think it's got to be a connection, and they've taken a look at a mathematical formula that they think that will work. And if it gets put in place, then they obviously are expecting some sort of return on it. They certainly aren't going to do it for free. But if you do again, it's different. So if you do a naming rights, that there's some emotion involved. So again, from a marketing statistical area, you look at what you got, and you can advertise other places, and you can pretty much figure out what your eyeballs are looking at it. Who's ratings for your radio, for radio and television, viewership for newspaper, magazine, and then certainly in this day and age, clicks on sites. But where's the pushback? What if K-State is forced to put a CVC symbol on their helmet? I mean, do they get pushback for that? Because that's not naming rights, but that's the private firm. And whatever the league gets named on, there's going to be, again, it's not going to be just whatever All-State 12 or Quick Trip 12 or whatever they decide with. There's going to be some sort of labeling all over the arenas and all over the stadiums on clothing. It's going to be a lot. And K-State does that already. K-State already does. They already sell we all know that. They sell broadcasting rights, and they sell rights for names, and it's all over everywhere. Now, how does this different? I don't know. Maybe they require exclusivity, and maybe they knock out some other advertisers to get more eyeballs on what they're doing. I think it's wide open. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out. I can see there being a lot of problems with it, but mostly just about it being level. That's the thing that really jumps out at me. If they're buying a percentage of the league, and everybody, they divide it 12 ways, and everybody gets the same amount. That's probably a great way to maybe lower the responsibilities on NIL, which has to be just a huge pressure on every athletic department, K-State included. But what I was leading to is, let's just say from a television viewer standpoint, the reason it's not level at the moment is I worked in Topeka, and if I recall correctly, there was at the time 238 television markets in the United States, and Topeka was, I think, at one point 178. So number one would be the largest, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and then down in the 200s, probably somewhere in New Mexico, like Roswell, New Mexico, or something. So we're, K-State's dealing with less eyeballs because they're in the, 170th market theoretically. And I think it's going to be very difficult just from that aspect of it. I just can't see it being level. But again, somebody certainly they'll get some pushback from the people that are going to make those decisions, and they're going to try to find a way to maybe equal the payout between all the schools. But hey, that's what I know, Mitch. I don't know a lot, but that's perspective I can give to you.
Well, I appreciate your expertise. Go ahead, Troy.
I just was going to ask, what should I do with my NVIDIA stock, by the way?
Well, split. Do you own some?
I actually do, yes.
Great. Well, remember when I had a lot of people that called me and said, "Hey, it's going to split 10-1. Does that mean I'm going to be 10 times my value?" And I said, "No. It means that it's a net neutral investment. It means that the value that you have is going to be the same, but you're going to own 10 shares. And the reason for doing that is because they want to make it more affordable. Generally, however, it initially goes down in value, but the idea is that maybe someday down the road, each individual share will increase in value. So it's that ship may have passed for new investors, but way to go, Troy, to own it, to be on the way up rather than after it's already hit the peak.
Yeah, I try anyway. I recognized I recognized when the gamers were starting to get involved in Bitcoin, decided to start eating into some of what was going on there.
Well, there's a lot of stuff like that. I always tell my people, I say, you know what, avoid the flavor of the month.
Yeah. Because
the ship is, by the time you hear about it, it's already hit its peak generally. Sometimes that's not true, but that's generally the case. But, and NVIDIA was certainly something that was highly regarded, but it took a little bit to find momentum, kind of like Pfizer. Like Pfizer was highly regarded, but still hasn't caught its speed yet. And there's a lot of stuff like that.
Well, if I could give any financial advice, I would suggest if you want to be rich when you retire, go talk to Mark there on Anderson Avenue and go figure out your finances, and he's going to help you out pretty quickly there. Mark, I really appreciate you coming on and helping us out with kind of the ins and outs on what the Big 12 is moving towards with this equity, all these words I don't understand. Thank you for helping me understand a little bit about what's going on with the Big 12, and sooner or later we'll have you in to talk just regular sports if that sounds good to you.
That sounds fine. I appreciate being on. Nice visiting with all of you, and I'm certainly a frequent listener, and I enjoy all the jokes and the rapport between you guys. I knew I like, as I told Mitch before, I like the part where you guys talk about the music from the era of Passage.
Oh, yeah.
To get your perspective on it, I just get a real kick out of that. I just think that's because a lot of things that you say, I'm thinking in my mind when you say it, because just music, it's a reflection of the times that we live in, and it's supposed to be a sports show, but it's really funny that you guys talk about music because that's such an important part of our society and our memories of the past and all that. It's just really funny.
I like to mix it up once in a while. Mark, really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on. We'll be talking to you soon.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's Mark Ewing. He's a financial advisor. Edward Jones, location 2505 Anderson Avenue, Suite 103. I make a stop once in a while just to go and say hi to Mark Ewing. You may hear his commercials or the family of Edward Jones financial advisors from Clay Center to Wamego here on News Radio KMAN. We'll take a timeout. Tyler Dreiling joins us in hour number 2. We'll finish hour 1 of the game, including a little bit of a severe weather update from AJ coming up here after these words.
Your home for K-State sports.
We're going to accomplish great things together, and it's not going to take long. It is not going to take long. I didn't come to rebuild, right? Came to elevate.
This is The Game on News Radio KMAN.
back in the game. We're finishing hour one. Mitch Fortner, Troy Coverdale, AJ Shaw, who just gives a little update on a T-storm watch for the entire listening area. We're now not alone, though. Joining us for the rest of the show. Cool to do it? All right. Get on that microphone. Tyler Dreiling from Booth Creek Wagyu. What's up?
I'm doing great, man. It's a warm one out there today, but other than that, doing great. So happy to be here. Happy to be back in the studio with you guys, and I think we'll have some fun in the next hour.
We'll definitely talk more about why you're here in hour number two, because you guys got a big event coming up on Saturday. It's going to be a really fun thing. You guys have been advertising, and I saw the names are going to be there. That might be the best gathering of K-State student athletes you'll find outside of a K-State event.
That was kind of our thought, is like, yeah, let's make it so that like you would actually have to go to a game to be able to be around a group like that. So we're so excited, and it's going to be a great day.
A couple of things I wanted to touch on before we end hour number one. K-State football has commitment number 6 for the 2025 recruiting class. I mean, we talked about this last week with Drew Galloway from K-State Online. I continued yesterday with Derek Young from K-State Online. It was expecting starting last week that K-State was going to catch fire and really pick up momentum in the recruiting class for 25 that maybe got to a little bit of a slow start. And now they got commitment number 6 with Dalton Knapp or Knapp. I think it's one of those two. They seem very different pronunciations, and they are. K-N-A-P-P. I said Knapp because there was I used to watch that American Ninja Warrior.
Okay.
And there was a contestant. His name was Dalton Knapp. The same name.
Okay.
I think he was from Missouri or something like that. Anyway, he stunk. This Knapp guy is going to be a lot better. An edge rusher. He's been a weak side kid throughout his high school career. 3 stars according to 24/7 Sports and Rivals. He has not been graded yet by On3 or ESPN. The 124th best edge in America according to 24/7 Sports. But it is another 3-star kid. He was on that visit with a lot of other potential recruits. Actually, some are recruits. Weston Polk, Dylan Duff, Will Kemna, who are all committed. Adonis Moyes, he committed very recently. Martell Jackson from Derby High School, he just committed a few days ago. I think it was over the weekend he did so. They were all on the same visit. And now half of that group, because there's other names in there as well, but half of that group is now committed to K-State. So
that's a heck of a weekend right there.
It really is. Some were a part of camp, some were in for visits, but they were here, and they all went pretty quickly. All went pretty quickly with their recruitments. Now, his recruitment really picked up over the last couple of months. He actually had a ton of offers on the table. I think when I list you the schools, K-State's by far the best one. So the Cats, you have KU. So he was actually scheduled to visit KU. So take a hike, Jayhawks. No go for you guys. Houston's in there. Boise State was also on the list to visit. That's not going to happen. Maybe it still is, but he's not committed to those guys. Arkansas State is in there. Miami, Ohio, New Mexico State, North Texas, Oregon State, blah, blah, blah. There's a handful of others. Washington State, not happening. So, momentum is hot for K-State in recruiting, and expect more names very soon. Just happened to be at a restaurant last night, and I saw a coach sitting there with some recruits. They may be getting ready to commit. I don't know. Maybe they did last night. We just haven't heard anything yet. No, things are really picking up for the 2025 class. Tyler, anything you want to say about the 25 class?
It's going to be exciting to see what this coaching staff can do with that class, because they are elevating the quality of recruit that they're getting in on visits. I think that Knapp is a really special talent, one that they really wanted.
Fort Worth, Texas kid.
Yeah. And, obviously the Texas pipeline is huge for K-State in recruiting, being able to continue to pull talent out of that state. So it's an exciting time. I mean, there's just so much optimism around the program and what K-State is building, and you can really feel how it transcends just being excited for the season itself, because you can see it building with the excitement that the recruits have when they come in on these visits.
All right, one more thing before we wrap up the hour. Do you guys ever watch The Weakest Link?
I do not.
I love it.
I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times.
Jane Lynch, who's the new host, and she's done so now. She's been the host for a couple of seasons now. I like her better than the Ann gal that was just ruthless the entire show.
Sure.
Jane Lynch will throw some heat at you, but she'll also joke around with you. She's not like the entirely mean throughout the show type of host.
Right. Well,
but she has the edge.
Yeah, Anne's case was she was the original host in Britain, which is why they attached her to it here.
Manhattan, Kansas, on this past week's episode, actually I think it was Monday, Tuesday, whatever day it airs, Manhattan, Kansas was a question. It was featured on The Weakest Link.
Michelle, since it's smaller than New York, the city of Manhattan, Kansas goes by what nickname?
Okay, so I paused it there. Do you think the contestant got the question correct?
Not a chance.
If I'm not from Kansas, my mind's probably not working that quickly to assume Little Apple.
Right.
You're probably just not aware of the nickname. I mean, ask AJ, you're from Chicago. Did you know Manhattan, Kansas existed or was known as the Little Apple prior to considering K-State as a college?
I knew what Manhattan, Kansas was because I watched the Fiesta Bowl, but I did not know it was called the Little Apple until I visited. Also, shout out to Jane Lynch. She's a Chicago girl. Born in Evergreen Park, grew up in Dalton.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, here's the answer. Want to pause?
Old York. Nope, the Little Apple.
She had to get something out there.
For crying out loud.
Got to keep it moving. That's hour one of the game. Hour number two, Tyler Dryling's going to join us as we talk Wildcat Wagyu Tailgate. And he'll stick around for a couple of, we're, of course, going to continue on to talk about private investment, equity, a lot of big words that Mark Ewing helped us out with, plus naming rights, all coming up next in the game.